Hey guys, tonight we journey back to the Industrial Revolution, to a world of blackened skies, crowded streets, roaring machinery, freezing rooms, filthy water, endless work, and a kind of exhaustion that followed ordinary people from the moment they opened their eyes until the moment they finally collapsed into sleep. Forget the polished paintings of Victorian factories with their tall windows and orderly rows of workers. Forget the romantic idea that the Industrial Revolution simply brought progress, prosperity, and modern life. For millions of people, the beginning of industrialization was not a comfortable step into the future. It was an uncertain journey into a harsher world where your time no longer belonged entirely to you, where a machine could replace your hands, where losing a day's wages could mean losing dinner, and where the difference between having a home and sleeping somewhere damp and overcrowded could be frighteningly small. So tonight, dim the lights, settle in, and imagine that you have been given one impossible chance. You wake up in Britain during the 19th century, not as a wealthy factory owner, not as a gentleman watching the transformation from behind a carriage window, but as an ordinary working person with little money, no political influence, and no guarantee that tomorrow will be better than today. Your first mistake would be thinking that the hardest part is getting a job. It isn't. The hardest part is understanding what the job will demand from you once you have it. It is still dark when you wake. There is no alarm clock ringing beside your bed, no electric light waiting at the turn of a switch, and certainly no warm central heating making the morning comfortable. The room is cold enough that leaving the blanket feels like a punishment. You have slept in clothing that you may not have properly removed the night before because the room is too cold, and because there is little reason to waste energy getting dressed twice. Your sleeping space is small. Perhaps you share it with family members. Perhaps another person rents part of the room. In rapidly growing industrial towns, overcrowding is not an unusual inconvenience. It is part of everyday life. People have arrived from villages and rural districts looking for employment, while existing populations have expanded around mills, foundries, mines, canals, railways, and workshops. Houses have been built quickly, cheaply, and densely. The streets that were once fields are becoming rows of brick dwellings. Drainage struggles to keep pace with population growth. Waste can accumulate in places where it should never have been allowed to remain. Fresh air is a luxury that nobody has yet learned to demand as a basic necessity. You lie still for a few seconds because you already know what the morning means. There is work waiting. The first thing you notice is the cold. The second is the smell. Smoke enters almost everything. Coal smoke drifts through industrial districts and settles over roofs, windows, clothes, and lungs. Inside the house, the air may carry the smell of damp fabric, cooking, human waste, coal, and bodies packed too closely together. Outside, the smell changes but does not necessarily improve. There may be horses, manure, stagnant water, open drains, refused smoke, and the unmistakable odor of a city growing faster than its ability to keep itself clean. You finally get up. There is no leisurely breakfast waiting for you. If your family is fortunate enough to have food available, it may be something plain and filling rather than luxurious. Bread, porridge, potatoes, tea, perhaps a little meat when circumstances permit. The diet of working people varied enormously by region, income, occupation, and period, but one thing remains constant. Food costs money, and money comes from work. When wages are low, every meal becomes a calculation. A person who earns just enough to survive cannot casually decide to miss a shift. You prepare yourself to leave. And this is where the Industrial Revolution begins to reveal one of its most important changes. For centuries, many people's working lives had been organized around seasons, daylight, weather, agriculture, household production, local trades, and the rhythm of tasks. Industrialization did not instantly destroy all of those patterns, and rural life remained important for a very long time. But in the factory districts, a new discipline was becoming increasingly powerful. The clock. The time could now be measured, divided, monitored, and sold with extraordinary precision. A factory did not care that you were tired. A machine did not care that your child had been sick during the night. A production schedule did not care that the weather was miserable. If the bell rang and you were not there, you could be considered late. And being late could cost you. You step into the street. The darkness is beginning to weaken, but the industrial town is already awake. Other workers emit RGE from doorways. Men and women walk quickly. Some carry food wrapped in cloth. Others have tools. A few are barely awake. Children are moving among adults, some heading toward workshops or mills depending on their age and circumstances. Their small size, which might have made them useful around machines and under equipment, could also place them directly in danger. You join the flow of people. The factory district seems to have its own heartbeat. Smoke rises from chimneys. Carts move through narrow streets. Horses struggle over uneven roads. Doors open. Workers disappear inside buildings. And somewhere ahead, machinery is already beginning to move. You hear the sound before you see the factory. It is not one sound. It is hundreds of sounds occupying the same space. Metal striking metal. Belts moving. Wheels turning. A steam hissing. Spindles spinning. Wooden floors vibrating. Voices attempting to compete with machinery that does not care whether anyone can hear. The noise can be overwhelming. And you have not even started working yet. The building itself may look enormous compared with the homes around it. Industrial architecture is built for production. Space is organized around machines, workers, raw materials, and movement. Windows may stretch high along walls, allowing daylight into the working area, but artificial lighting is increasingly used when daylight is insufficient. The atmosphere can be humid, dusty, smoky, oily, or filled with fibers depending on the industry. You enter. The warmth is different here. It is not the comfortable warmth of a fireplace. It comes from bodies, machinery, steam, and industrial processes. In textile mills, humidity may be deliberately maintained because certain fibers behave differently under moist conditions. In other industries, heat may simply be a consequence of furnaces, engines, boilers, and equipment operating continuously. Your clothes begin to feel different almost immediately. And then you see your workplace. This is the moment when the romantic image of industrial progress should disappear. There is nothing romantic about standing beside a machine that is larger, faster, stronger, and less forgiving than any human body. The machine does not get tired. You do. The machine does not become distracted. You can. The machine does not understand pain. You do. And yet your job may require you to work around it for hours. Early industrial machinery was not automatically designed with modern ideas of occupational safety. Guards, emergency systems, standardized training, and comprehensive workplace protections developed gradually and unevenly. Even where rules existed, enforcement could be weak. The danger depended heavily on the industry, the employer, the particular machine, and the period. In a textile mill, loose clothing or hair could become entangled. In a foundry, burns and crushing injuries were constant possibilities. In mines, falling rock, explosions, flooding, suffocation, and long-term respiratory damage threatened workers. In construction, people worked at heights without the protections that modern workers might consider basic. In workshops, cutting tools, presses, gears, and moving components could injure anyone who made one wrong movement. And you are expected to learn quickly, because the factory has no reason to slow down for you. A supervisor watches. The machinery continues. Your hands begin working. At first, you are concentrating on the task. Then you notice something unexpected. Time has almost disappeared. There is no natural pause after a certain amount of work. The machine determines the rhythm. If you are spinning, weaving, winding, cutting, sorting, carrying, feeding, or assembling, your movements must follow the process. You cannot simply decide to work more slowly because your back hurts. Someone else is waiting. The machine is waiting. The production targets are waiting. The clock is waiting. And somewhere beyond the factory walls, the person who owns the business is thinking about costs. This is one of the uncomfortable truths about industrialization. Factories could produce enormous quantities of goods, but they also created enormous pressure to keep production moving. Every minute of downtime could mean lost output. Every damaged machine could mean lost money. Every worker who failed to appear could create a problem. The employer therefore had an economic reason to make the workplace efficient. The worker had an economic reason to keep the job. Those two interests sometimes aligned. Sometimes they did not. You are still thinking about this when the first real wave of exhaustion arrives. It is not dramatic. There is no sudden collapse. It is simply a heaviness in your shoulders. Your eyes begin to sting. Your fingers feel less precise. You realize you have been standing for hours. You look toward a clock. Only a small portion of the working day has passed. That is when you understand something that nobody needed to explain to you. You are going to be here for a long time. Very long. Working hours varied substantially by industry and period, and the 19th century saw important changes in regulation. Reform laws gradually restricted working hours for some groups, especially women and children, and later movements pushed for shorter working days. But these changes did not arrive immediately, and adult male workers in many occupations could still face extraordinarily long working days. The factory bell was not simply telling you when to arrive. It was organizing your life. Your morning, your meals, your sleep, your family time, your exhaustion, even your sense of what a day meant. And perhaps that is one reason the Industrial Revolution changed society so deeply. It did not merely introduce machines. It introduced new relationships between people, time, money, production, and survival. You continue working. Outside, the sun has finally risen above the rooftops. But inside the factory, daylight means almost nothing. The windows are high. The air is thick. The machines keep moving. You begin to understand that the modern world is being built around you, but you are not necessarily the person who will benefit from it. Someone else owns the factory. Someone else owns the machines. Someone else decides what will be produced. Someone else calculates the profit. You own your ability to work. And that is what you have brought with you this morning. Your body, your hands, your time. For now, that is enough. Until it isn't. Because somewhere in the same industrial town, another person has just been told that their wages will be reduced. Somewhere else, a child has been sent into a mill because the family needs the money. In another district, a miner is descending underground. In another street, a woman is carrying water up several flights of stairs. And in a cramped room not far from where you stand, someone is coughing through the morning because the air inside the house is almost as unhealthy as the air outside. The Industrial Revolution is already changing everything. But you have not yet seen the worst of it. For now, the machines continue their relentless rhythm. And as the first hours of your working life disappear into the noise, you slowly realize that surviving this new world will require more than strength. You will need luck, a great deal of it. And you are about to discover just how little luck an ordinary worker could afford to lose. The machines continue their relentless rhythm. And as the first hours of your working life disappear into the noise, you slowly realize that surviving this new world will require more than strength. You will need luck, a great deal of it. And you are about to discover just how little luck an ordinary worker could afford to lose. The thought stays with you for the rest of the morning. Your body has begun to settle into the movement required by the job. That does not mean the work has become easier. It simply means that your muscles have accepted the fact that they have no choice. Your hands repeat the same actions. Your eyes watch the same mechanisms. Your ears endure the same roar. There are moments when the machinery seems almost hypnotic. Then suddenly something goes wrong. A thread breaks. A belt slips. A worker calls for assistance. Someone moves quickly between machines. For a few seconds, the rhythm changes. Then it begins again. You realize that the factory is not really a place where you work alongside machines. It is a place where you must work according to them. That distinction matters. The machine establishes the pace and you follow. Minutes become hours. Eventually, you are allowed a break. It is not a holiday. It is simply a pause long enough for you to eat. You step away from the machinery and discover that your body feels strange. Your ears continue to hear the machinery even after you have moved away from it. Your hands feel stiff. Your legs are tired. There is dust on your clothing. You take out whatever food you brought. It is plain. Perhaps bread. Perhaps potatoes. Perhaps something wrapped carefully in cloth. You eat quickly. There is no reason to linger. Around you, other workers are doing the same thing. Some talk. Some remain silent. Some stare at the floor. A few laugh. That laughter surprises you. But then you understand. People living through difficult conditions do not spend every moment discussing how miserable their lives are. They still joke. They still fall in love. They still argue about football, politics, neighbors, wages, food, and family. They still tell stories. They still celebrate birthdays when they can. They still dream about a better house. Misery does not erase ordinary human life. It simply makes ordinary life more difficult. Your break ends. You return to the machinery. The afternoon stretches on. At some point, you stop thinking about the entire working day. You think only about the next hour. Then the next. That is how endurance works. If you constantly imagine how many hours remain, the day becomes unbearable. So you reduce it. One task. One movement. 1 hour. One meal. One more hour. And eventually the bell rings. The sound is different this time. You almost do not believe it. Workers begin moving toward the exits. The factory suddenly seems to breathe out. You step into the street. The change is enormous. After hours inside the building, the outside air feels almost empty. But it is not clean. Industrial towns have their own atmosphere. Coal smoke hangs over rooftops. Chimneys rise above houses. The streets are crowded. People are returning home from mills, workshops, warehouses, construction sites, foundries, mines, and countless other forms of employment. The town is not quiet. It is alive. But it is an uncomfortable kind of life. There are too many people and too little space. That is one of the defining problems of rapid industrialization. Factories require workers. Workers need somewhere to live. And when thousands of people arrive in a town faster than housing, sanitation, and infrastructure can expand, the result is overcrowding. You turn down a narrow street. The buildings seem to lean toward each other. Rows of houses have been constructed close together because land is valuable and workers need affordable accommodation near their jobs. Some dwellings are small. Some are divided into multiple rooms rented separately. In poorer districts, several families may occupy houses that were never designed for so many people. And this is where your understanding of survival changes again. The factory is dangerous, but home is not necessarily safe. You reach your street. A child runs past you. Another is carrying something too heavy for their size. A woman stands in a doorway. Someone is shouting from an upper floor. A cart squeezes through the road. You continue walking. The smell changes as you approach the poorer housing. There is smoke. There is waste. There is dampness. There is human waste. There may be open drains or inadequate sewerage. Clean water cannot simply be assumed. In many rapidly growing industrial communities, sanitation systems lagged behind population growth. Access to safe drinking water varied greatly by town and period, but contamination of water supplies was a serious problem. And when water becomes contaminated, disease does not need an invitation. It only needs an opportunity. You arrive home. Calling it home may already be generous. The room is small. The ceiling is low. The walls may be damp. There is little privacy. If you have a family, everyone shares the same limited space. If the family is large, sleeping arrangements become a puzzle. Children may sleep together. Adults may share beds. Sometimes beds themselves are rented or shared. In some overcrowded lodging arrangements, several unrelated people can occupy the same dwelling. Privacy becomes something wealthy people can afford. You remove your work clothes. They smell of the factory. Coal, oil, dust, sweat, metal, whatever your occupation has placed into the air. You may want to wash, but washing is not as simple as turning a tap. Water must be obtained, carried, stored, heated if warm water is wanted. And fuel is not free. So a person who has spent an exhausting day working may still have to perform another series of tasks before they can rest. Your family is waiting. If you have children, they are tired too. Their lives are not necessarily separate from the industrial economy. This is one of the harsh realities of the period. Industrialization created jobs, but it also created an environment in which families often depended on multiple earners. For poor families, one wage could be dangerously insufficient. That meant women worked, children worked, teenagers worked. Anyone who could earn money might be expected to contribute. The idea of childhood as a long, protected stage of life was not yet universal. Children from poor households could become economic contributors surprisingly early. Their small bodies were sometimes considered useful for jobs requiring them to move through confined spaces, reach beneath machinery, or perform repetitive tasks. That did not mean every child worked in a factory. It did not mean every working child experienced the same conditions. But child labor was widespread enough in some industries to become one of the great social controversies of industrial Britain. Later reformers would expose conditions that shocked the public. Parliament would investigate. Reports would be written. Laws would change. But tonight, you are not reading a report. You are living inside the problem. Your child asks for food. You look at what is available. You calculate. Bread costs money. Fuel costs money. Rent costs money. Clothing costs money. Shoes cost money. Medicine costs money. Everything seems to have a price. And wages can disappear frighteningly quickly. This is another difference between poverty in an industrial city and the romantic image of a simple rural life. Money has become central to survival. In a subsistence economy, people may produce some of what they consume. In an industrial economy, especially for urban workers, the situation is different. You sell your labor for wages. Then you use those wages to purchase necessities. If you cannot work, you may not earn. If you do not earn, you may not eat. That chain connects your body directly to the labor market. Your health is therefore not merely a personal matter. It is an economic asset. And that is why illness can be terrifying. You sit down to eat. The meal is modest. Perhaps there is conversation. Perhaps there is not. You are too tired. Someone mentions a neighbor who has been sick. Another person says someone has lost their job. Someone else complains about rent. These are ordinary conversations in extraordinary circumstances. Then you notice the coughing. Not yours. Someone else's. It is a dry cough at first. You have heard it before. In crowded cities, respiratory illness can spread easily. Tuberculosis was a major killer in 19th century Britain and elsewhere. Other infectious diseases also flourished under conditions of overcrowding and poor sanitation. Cholera outbreaks became infamous, particularly because contaminated water could spread the disease rapidly through communities. But nobody sitting at the table can see bacteria. They see symptoms. They see fever. They see weakness. They see someone becoming thinner. They see a neighbor disappear from work. And sometimes they see a coffin. Medicine has not yet reached the point where modern antibiotics, vaccines, laboratory testing, and public health systems can provide the protection people today may take for granted. Even when doctors understand that something is wrong, treatment options can be limited. And medical care costs money. So many families wait. They wait until the illness becomes serious. They wait because they cannot afford a doctor. They wait because they believe the sickness will pass. They wait because they have no alternative. You finish your meal. Outside, the street is becoming darker. The factory district does not completely sleep. Some industries operate long hours. Transport continues. Workers move through the streets. The glow from windows appears here and there. Smoke remains above the rooftops. You look around your room. This is the strange contradiction of the Industrial Revolution. The world outside is becoming more productive than ever. Factories can produce enormous quantities of textiles. Iron production is expanding. Coal extraction is increasing. Steam power is transforming transportation and manufacturing. Railways are connecting places that once seemed distant. Goods can be produced, transported, and sold on scales earlier generations could scarcely imagine. And yet you are sitting in a room where a family may struggle to afford enough food. Progress exists, but progress is not distributed equally. The machines are making society richer in many ways. That does not mean every worker becomes rich. Economic growth and personal security are not the same thing. For some people, industrialization creates fortunes. For others, it creates employment. For others, it creates displacement. For still others, it creates dangerous work that barely pays enough to survive. And for millions, it creates a completely new way of living. You lie down. The bed is not particularly comfortable. You are exhausted enough that comfort hardly matters. Your muscles ache. Your ears still seem to hear machinery. You close your eyes. But sleep does not come immediately. Someone nearby is arguing. A child is crying. A cart moves through the street. A dog barks. Somewhere in the distance, a factory whistle or bell signals another shift. You realize that the industrial town never completely stops. Tomorrow will come quickly, and when it does, you will have to return. The thought is almost unbearable. But then you remember something even more frightening. You cannot simply decide not to go. Because the rent is due. Because food costs money. Because someone depends on your wages. Because there may be 10 other people waiting for the same job. This is the invisible pressure surrounding industrial workers. Unemployment is not merely disappointing. It can be catastrophic. And the fear of losing employment can make people tolerate conditions they would otherwise reject. You turn over. The damp wall is cold beside you. Your body finally begins to surrender to exhaustion. Just before sleep arrives, you think about the factory. The machines. The noise. The clock. And the strange fact that tomorrow morning, you will once again walk into that building voluntarily. Not because you want to, because you need to. And this is where the real story of the Industrial Revolution becomes more complicated. The workers were not simply helpless victims. They resisted. They complained. They organized. They struck. They formed societies. They demanded higher wages. They demanded shorter hours. They demanded safer conditions. They challenged employers. They challenged governments. They discovered that an individual worker could be easily ignored, but thousands of workers acting together were much harder to ignore. The struggle would not be peaceful. There would be fear. There would be arrests. There would be broken machinery. There would be strikes. There would be political battles. There would be moments when workers realized that the factory did not merely control their working lives. It had become the center of a much larger struggle over who should control the future. But you do not know all of that yet. You only know that you are tired. Very tired. And tomorrow morning, the bell will ring again. You close your eyes. The industrial town continues outside. Smoke moves across the dark sky. Somewhere a furnace burns. Somewhere a miner is still underground. Somewhere a factory wheel continues turning. And somewhere in another cramped room, another family is counting the coins they have left until payday. For now you sleep. But the Industrial Revolution is not sleeping. It is expanding. And tomorrow, it will take you somewhere darker. Below the streets. Into the mines. Where the sunlight disappears, the air becomes dangerous, and the simple act of earning a living can mean descending into the earth with no guarantee that you will return. The simple act of earning a living can mean descending into the earth with no guarantee that you will return. Morning comes before you are ready for it. You wake to the sound of movement in the room. Someone is already dressed. Someone else is searching for a pair of shoes. The air is cold and your body still remembers yesterday's work. Your shoulders ache. Your hands feel stiff. For a few seconds, you lie still and listen. Then you remember. Today you are going underground. You get up. The meal is small because there is no reason to spend more than necessary. You eat what you have and prepare for the journey. Outside, the streets are beginning to fill again. Workers move through the darkness toward their workplaces. You follow them. The mine is different from the factory. A factory surrounds you with machinery. A mine surrounds you with earth. That distinction seems simple until you stand at the entrance. The opening looks almost like a wound in the landscape. Men disappear into it. They come out covered in black dust. The ground around the pit is muddy. Coal is everywhere. Wagons move back and forth. Machinery operates above the shaft. The smell of smoke and coal hangs in the air. You are told what you must do. You listen carefully. There is no room for pretending that you understand something when you do not. Underground, mistakes can be fatal. You descend. The first thing you notice is the darkness. Even with lamps, the world below is nothing like the world above. The ceiling is low in places. The passageways can be narrow. The ground is uneven. Water may collect beneath your feet. The air feels different. You realize how completely dependent you are on systems you cannot see. Ventilation, timber supports, drainage, lamps, transport routes. Every one of these things must function. If something fails, the consequences can spread quickly. Coal has become one of the most important fuels of industrialization. It powers steam engines. It heats furnaces. It drives factories. It moves trains. It supports iron production. It helps power the enormous transformation taking place above ground. But coal does not simply appear. Someone has to remove it from the earth. That someone is you. You begin moving through the underground workings. The work is physically demanding. Depending on the mine and occupation, workers may cut coal, loosen it, load it, haul it, transport it, maintain passages, operate equipment, or perform other specialized tasks. There is no single universal mining experience. Conditions differ by region, mine, decade, technology, and job. But the basic reality remains. You are underground because the industrial economy desperately wants coal. And the deeper the industry reaches, the more difficult the work can become. You bend down. Your back begins to ache. You strike. Again. 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 Coal breaks away. The sound is strangely dull. There's no fresh breeze. There is no open horizon. There is only the tunnel. and the knowledge that hundreds of feet of earth may be above your head. You stop for a moment. You look at your lamp. Its small flame is more than a source of light. In some mining environments, the flame can also provide a warning about dangerous gases. That makes the lamp frightening. If something is wrong with the air, you cannot simply see the danger. The atmosphere itself can become an enemy. Methane, historically known as fire damp, could accumulate in certain coal mines. If ignited, it could cause devastating explosions. Another danger was black damp, air depleted in oxygen and containing carbon dioxide, which could make breathing difficult or impossible. There were other hazards too. Coal dust, falling rock, flooding, mechanical accidents, explosions, cave-ins, and the long-term effects of breathing polluted air. You continue working. You have no choice. Above ground, your family needs your wages. Below ground, the coal seam does not care about your family. It simply waits. You hear footsteps. Someone is approaching. It is a child. For a moment, you almost forget how young the worker looks. Then you realize he is small, very small. Children worked in many parts of the industrial economy, including mines and textile production, particularly before reforms reduced some forms of child labor. In mines, children could perform jobs such as opening and closing ventilation doors or assisting with coal transport, depending on the period and local practices. Some were known as trappers. Their task could be deceptively simple. They operated ventilation doors underground. They had to remain in darkness, waiting for coal workers or carts to pass. Then they opened the door, closed it, waited, opened it again, closed it again. For hours. Imagine being that child. No sunlight, no playground, no classroom. Just darkness and a door. The job might not involve the same heavy physical labor as cutting coal, but the isolation could be severe. And it reveals something important about the industrial economy. The factory did not merely employ adults. The mine did not merely employ strong men. Industrial society found ways to use almost every available pair of hands. If a task could be done by a child, someone might decide that a child should do it. The economic logic was brutally simple. A child could earn money. A poor family needed money. Therefore, the child worked. But the social consequences were enormous. Children who spent their formative years working long hours had less opportunity for education. They were exposed to dangerous environments. They experienced exhaustion. Some suffered serious injuries. Some died. And public awareness of these conditions gradually increased. Investigators visited mines. They interviewed workers. They collected evidence. Parliamentary inquiries produced reports. The public began hearing stories that challenged the idea that industrial growth was automatically beneficial. The evidence would help drive reforms. But reform was not immediate. You are still underground. And history does not protect you simply because future generations will eventually decide that your working conditions were unacceptable. You must survive them first. A sudden sound comes from somewhere deeper in the mine. You stop. Everyone stops. For a moment, the entire passage seems to hold its breath. Then you hear voices. Someone has dropped something. No explosion. No collapse. The work resumes. You realize how quickly fear can become ordinary. That may be one of the strangest aspects of dangerous work. If you were told in advance that every few minutes you would risk death, you might refuse. But when the danger is distributed across an entire working day, it becomes easier to ignore. You do not think about death every second. You think about the next task. Then the next. You work. The coal is loaded. The material must be moved. Someone pushes or pulls. The mine has its own economy of motion. Everything has to travel. Coal moves from the seam toward the surface. Workers move with it. Tools move. Waste moves. Water must sometimes be removed. Air must circulate. And the entire system depends on countless people performing repetitive tasks correctly. Above ground, someone may see a railway locomotive burning coal and think only of speed. You see something different. You see the darkness beneath the ground. You see the workers. You see the sweat. You see the dust. You understand that industrial power has a human cost. And then there is the problem of injury. Suppose a rock falls. There may be no warning. A worker can be crushed. Suppose a cart moves unexpectedly. A body can be trapped. Suppose a lamp ignites gas. The explosion can race through the workings. Suppose water breaks through. The mine can become a death trap. There are accidents that make newspapers. There are accidents that become statistics. And there are accidents that are remembered only by families. You keep working. Hours pass. You cannot see the sun. That fact begins to disturb you. Above ground, people understand time partly through daylight. Below, time is measured by work. You may have entered in darkness. You will leave in darkness. The day could have been beautiful. You would never know. This is one of the psychological burdens of underground work. The world above continues without you. Children play. Markets open. People travel. Rain falls. Clouds move. Sunlight crosses the sky. You see none of it. Your world is the tunnel. Eventually, you begin the journey back toward the surface. Your body is exhausted. Your clothes are black. Your face is covered in coal dust. You climb. The ascent seems longer than the descent. Then you see something you have not seen for hours. Daylight. It is almost painful. You step outside. The air feels enormous. The sky seems impossibly large. You breathe deeply. For a few seconds, you simply stand there. Then reality returns. You still have to go home. You still have to eat. You still have to sleep. And tomorrow you may have to come back. You walk through the mining settlement. The houses here are shaped by the same economic forces as the factory towns. Workers need housing. Employers need workers nearby. Communities grow around industry. But industrial communities can become dependent on a single employer or a single industry. If the mine closes, the town suffers. If wages fall, families suffer. If demand for coal changes, workers feel it immediately. You reach home. Your child looks at you. Perhaps they ask whether you are tired. You laugh. The question is almost absurd. Of course you are tired. But what would you say? That you were afraid. That you imagined the roof collapsing. That you wondered whether the air was safe. That you thought about the child sitting alone beside the ventilation door. You may not tell them. You sit down. The black dust is difficult to remove. Water is limited. Soap costs money. Clean clothing costs money. You eat. You rest. Then you begin thinking about tomorrow. This is the strange prison of wage labor. You are free in the legal sense in ways that earlier forms of forced labor were not. You are not necessarily owned by your employer. You can, in principle, leave. But leaving may mean losing your income. And if another job is not available, your freedom becomes theoretical. This tension would become one of the central questions of industrial society. What does freedom mean when you are free to quit, but quitting means hunger? What does choice mean when every available choice is bad? Industrial capitalism created opportunities. It also created dependencies. The people who owned factories, mines, machinery, warehouses, and capital possessed enormous economic power. Workers possessed labor, and labor could be purchased. That relationship would eventually produce organized movements demanding change. But before those movements become powerful, workers must endure years of uncertainty. You lie down. Your body hurts differently after the mine. Your muscles feel heavy. Your lungs feel irritated. You cough. Maybe it is nothing. Maybe it is the beginning of something worse. You cannot know. And that uncertainty is another part of industrial life. Modern people are accustomed to thinking about occupational hazards through regulations, warning labels, protective equipment, inspections, compensation systems, and medical monitoring. Those systems did not appear fully formed. They were fought for, built slowly, often after people had already been injured or killed. Every safety rule has a history. Behind many regulations is an accident. Behind many investigations is a family. Behind many reforms is someone who refused to accept that death was simply the price of earning a wage. But tonight, none of those reforms have arrived quickly enough to protect you completely. You close your eyes. The darkness is familiar now. Perhaps too familiar. You think about the mine. Then you think about the factory. You realize that both places have something in common. They have changed your relationship with your own body. Your hands are no longer simply your hands. They are tools. Your back is a source of labor. Your legs carry you to work. Your eyes monitor production. Your lungs breathe whatever air the workplace provides. Your time belongs to the clock. And when your body eventually becomes too damaged to work, the question becomes painfully simple. Who will pay you? Who will feed your family? Who will pay your rent? The Industrial Revolution has created a new kind of vulnerability. You do not have to be enslaved to be trapped. Sometimes all that is required is poverty. The next morning arrives. But this time, something has changed. You hear a different sound outside. Not a factory bell. Not a mine whistle. Voices. Angry voices. A crowd has gathered. Workers are talking. Something has happened at the factory. Wages are being discussed. Rumors are spreading. Someone says the employer intends to change the rules. Someone else says jobs may be lost. Another worker says they will not accept it. You stand at the edge of the crowd. For the first time, you see something that the factory owner cannot easily control. Not a machine. Not a mind. Not a clock. People. Hundreds of people. And as the crowd begins to move, you realize that the Industrial Revolution has produced something else besides factories, coal, railways, and enormous fortunes. It has produced a workforce large enough to discover its own power. The question is whether that power can survive the consequences of using it. The question is whether that power can survive the consequences of using it. You remain at the edge of the crowd. Nobody is working. That alone feels strange. The factory stands behind you, its windows dark in places, its machinery silent or running at a reduced pace depending on what has happened inside. The enormous building that normally dictates the rhythm of the neighborhood suddenly seems less powerful. Without workers, a factory is only a building full of machines. And the workers know it. You can see that realization spreading through the crowd. Men who normally keep their heads down are speaking openly. Women who spend their days working in mills or workshops are standing beside them. Older workers are warning younger ones to be careful. Someone has brought news from another street. Someone else claims another workplace is considering similar action. Rumors move faster than facts. That is often what happens when people are frightened. The original complaint may have been simple. A wage reduction. A change in working hours. A new rule. A fine. A dismissal. A demand for greater production. But once workers begin discussing the problem together, the complaint becomes something larger. It becomes a question of power. You listen. One worker says the wages have already fallen too far. Another says the employer has no choice because orders have declined. Someone else shouts that the owner is still making money. Nobody has the full picture. But everyone knows one thing. Their own household budget is already stretched. A reduction of even a small amount can matter. You think about your room, the rent, the food, fuel, clothing, the possibility of illness. Everything is connected. If wages fall, something has to disappear. Perhaps meat, perhaps tea, perhaps heating, perhaps shoes, perhaps the family eats less. And if the reduction is large enough, perhaps someone else in the household must find work. The crowd grows louder. You feel something you have not felt inside the factory. A strange sense of strength. Not personal strength, collective strength. One worker can be dismissed. 10 workers can be replaced. But what happens when an entire workforce refuses to enter? That is the question. And it is a dangerous question. Industrial society is still learning how to deal with organized labor. The legal status of combinations, trade unions, strikes, and collective action changes over time and differs by country and period. In Britain, earlier legislation had restricted combinations of workers, while later reforms gradually altered the legal environment and helped trade unionism develop more openly. But laws do not erase fear. The employer has power. Workers know it. The employer can dismiss people. Workers know that too. A factory owner may have access to capital, managers, lawyers, political connections, and replacement labor. A worker may have only a few coins in their pocket. So the crowd's strength depends on one thing. How long can they afford to remain united? That question follows you everywhere. You go home. The argument continues inside your head. You tell your family what happened. Nobody celebrates. Instead, they worry. A strike sounds brave when discussed in a crowd. It sounds frightening when you calculate how much food remains in the cupboard. You count your money. You count it twice. Not enough. You look at the calendar. Payday is still some distance away. If you stop working, there will be no wages. And if the employer refuses to negotiate, the stoppage could last days, perhaps longer. Your family cannot eat courage. You sleep badly. The next morning, the crowd is still there. Some workers enter. Others do not. This is where collective action becomes complicated. There is no single workers' movement behaving as one perfectly organized body. There are disagreements. Some workers want immediate action. Others fear dismissal. Some believe the employer should be confronted. Others think negotiation is better. Some workers have savings. Others have nothing. A married worker with several children faces a different risk from a young, unmarried worker living with parents. A skilled worker may have more bargaining power than an unskilled laborer. A worker in a growing industry may find another job. A worker in a declining industry may not. So even among people standing on the same street, the cost of resistance is different. You begin to understand why industrial disputes could become so bitter. Everybody wanted improvement, but everybody had something different to lose. The factory owner eventually appears. You see him from a distance. He does not look like you. His clothes are cleaner. His hands are different. He has not spent the morning underground or beside a machine. Perhaps he is not personally cruel. That is almost beside the point. The system itself creates a separation. He owns the factory. You work inside it. He sees production figures. You see the machine. He sees wages as a cost. You see wages as food. Both statements can be true at the same time. That is what makes industrial conflict so difficult. The owner may genuinely believe the business cannot survive without reducing costs. The workers may genuinely believe they cannot survive if wages are reduced. There is no simple compromise when both sides believe survival is at stake. The owner speaks. The crowd responds. Someone shouts. Someone else tells them to remain calm. The police may appear nearby. Their presence changes the atmosphere immediately. A crowd that was merely angry can become frightened. People know that the authorities have the power to disperse them. They also know that disorder can lead to arrests. Nobody wants to be the person who goes too far. But nobody wants to be the person who backs down either. This is the beginning of a long transformation in working-class politics. Industrialization creates concentrated populations. Concentrated populations make collective organization easier. If thousands of workers live within walking distance of one another, work in the same industry, face similar conditions, and depend on similar wages, they can begin to recognize shared interests. That does not happen automatically. It requires communication, meetings, pamphlets, newspapers, public speeches, friendly societies, trade organizations, and increasingly political movements. The factory has brought workers together physically. Now they are beginning to come together socially and politically. But the path is dangerous. There are employers who blacklist workers. There are disputes that become violent. There are machines destroyed by angry workers. There are protests met with force. There are arrests. And there is always the possibility of replacement. You hear someone mention the machines. That word makes several people uncomfortable. Because machines have become symbols of the entire transformation. To an investor, a machine can represent productivity. To an engineer, it can represent invention. To a consumer, it can mean cheaper goods. To a worker whose skills are suddenly less valuable, it can represent unemployment. This tension becomes especially visible in the history of textile production. As mechanization spreads, some skilled workers fear that machines and lower-paid labor will undermine traditional trades. The Luddite movement is one famous example. Contrary to the simplified modern image, the Luddites were not simply people who hated technology. Many were skilled textile workers protesting economic changes, wage reductions, and working conditions, and they attacked specific machines associated with the practices they opposed. The machine was not necessarily the true enemy. The way the machine was being used was. You think about that distinction while watching the factory windows. If a machine produces more cloth, that can benefit society. But who receives the benefit? If production doubles while wages fall, the worker may not feel richer. If the price of cloth declines, consumers may benefit. If the factory owner becomes wealthier, investment may increase. If the worker loses bargaining power, the same invention can feel like a threat. Industrialization is full of contradictions like this. Progress can be real. Suffering can be real. Both can happen simultaneously. The crowd eventually begins to disperse. No final victory has been achieved. No magical solution appears. Some workers return to their jobs. Others remain outside. You return home uncertain about what tomorrow will bring. That evening, your family asks whether the problem has been resolved. You shake your head. Not really. You sit quietly. The room feels smaller than before. You begin to understand that the Industrial Revolution is not simply happening inside factories. It is entering your home. It determines how much food you can buy, whether your children must work, how many hours you sleep, where you live, how far you walk, what diseases threaten you, whether you can afford a doctor, whether you can survive unemployment, and even whether you have enough time to speak with your family. The industrial city is changing the meaning of ordinary life. You no longer live only according to the seasons. You live according to wages. And wages depend on markets. Markets depend on demand. Demand depends on prices. Prices depend on production. Production depends on machines. And machines depend on workers. Everything is connected. You lie down again. This time you think about your children. You do not want them to spend their lives in the same conditions. But what choice do you have? Education costs time. Time costs wages. If a child works, the household receives income. If the child attends school, the family loses that income. This is one of the cruelest calculations faced by poor families. Everyone may understand that education is valuable. But hunger does not wait for long-term benefits. A family that needs money today cannot always sacrifice today's income for tomorrow's possibilities. This is why reformers increasingly focused on child labor and education. They argued that children should not spend their formative years in factories and mines. They collected evidence. They interviewed children. They described injuries. They documented working hours. They exposed conditions that many middle-class readers had never seen. The resulting public debate would eventually contribute to important legislation. But again, the process was gradual. The first reforms were limited. Enforcement could be weak. Employers found ways around regulations. Different industries were affected differently. And even when a law changed the maximum working hours for certain children or women, the wider working population could remain under intense pressure. You are beginning to understand why historians cannot describe the Industrial Revolution with one simple sentence. It was not simply good. It was not simply bad. It was a transformation. And transformations are rarely gentle. The next few years will bring railways through landscapes that once seemed permanent. Canals will carry enormous quantities of goods. Coal production will rise. Iron will reshape cities. Steam engines will become increasingly powerful. Factories will become larger. Markets will become wider. Cities will grow. And millions of people will find themselves living in a world their grandparents could barely recognize. But the bigger the system becomes, the more vulnerable you become to forces beyond your control. Suppose the factory receives fewer orders. You may lose hours. Suppose coal prices rise. Household costs increase. Suppose a recession arrives. Businesses cut production. Workers lose jobs. Suppose you become sick. Your income disappears. Suppose you are injured. Your ability to earn may disappear permanently. The Industrial Revolution has created enormous wealth. But wealth does not automatically create security. That lesson is becoming painfully clear. Weeks pass. The dispute at your workplace eventually fades. Some wages are restored. Others remain lower. A few workers leave. New workers arrive. The machinery continues. The factory bell rings. Life returns to its rhythm. But you are not the same person. You have seen the power of collective action. You have also seen how fragile it is. You have learned that the owner can wait. You cannot. He may have savings. You have rent. He may have investments. You have food to buy. That imbalance will continue shaping industrial politics for generations. And then something happens that brings the entire problem back to your own body. One afternoon, while working beside the machinery, you make a small mistake. Your hand moves too close. You hear a sudden noise. The machine catches part of your clothing. You pull backward. Someone shouts. The machinery stops. For a second, nobody moves. Then several workers rush toward you. Your heart is pounding. You look at your hand. It is shaking. You are not seriously injured. Not this time. But another worker nearby has not been so lucky. You hear the words that workers have learned to fear. An accident. The machine is examined. People talk. Someone says the guard was missing. Someone says it had been reported before. Someone says the worker should have been more careful. And there it is. The argument that will appear again and again throughout industrial history. Was the accident the worker's fault? Was it the employer's fault? Was it the machine? Was it inadequate regulation? Was it simply bad luck? The answer is often more complicated than anyone wants to admit. But for the injured worker, complexity does not change the pain. And for you, the incident leaves a new fear. You realize that surviving the Industrial Revolution is not only about enduring long hours. It is about reaching the end of each working day with the same number of fingers, the same strength in your limbs, and enough health left to work again tomorrow. You leave the factory that evening more carefully than usual. Outside, the city is changing again. A distant whistle cuts through the air. You turn. A train is passing. Steam rises above the rooftops. The railway is becoming one of the most extraordinary symbols of the new age. It can carry people and goods at speeds earlier generations would have considered astonishing. It connects towns. It changes markets. It changes travel. It changes where people can live and work. And soon, the railway will bring another kind of danger into your life. Because the Industrial Revolution is not finished with you. It has taken you from the factory floor to the mine, from the mine to the labor dispute. And now it is about to place you beside the iron roads that are cutting across Britain. You watch the train disappear into the distance. For a moment, you are fascinated. Then you notice the smoke settling over the houses. The wonder and the misery occupy the same sky. You turn toward home. Tomorrow, you will see the railway more closely. And when you do, you will discover that even something celebrated as one of humanity's greatest technological achievements can demand an exhausting human price from the people who build it, maintain it, operate it, and live beside it. You watch the train disappear into the distance. For a moment, you are fascinated. Then you notice the smoke settling over the houses. The wonder and the misery occupy the same sky. You turn toward home. Tomorrow, you will see the railway more closely. And when you do, you will discover that even something celebrated as one of humanity's greatest technological achievements can demand an exhausting human price from the people who build it, maintain it, operate it, and live beside it. The next morning begins with rain. Not a dramatic storm. Just steady, cold rain that turns the roads into mud. You wake before daylight. The room is damp. Your clothing is damp. Even the blanket seems to have absorbed the weather. You dress anyway. There is work waiting. But today, you are not heading toward the factory. You are going toward the railway. A contractor has been looking for workers. The pay is slightly better than some ordinary laboring jobs, although the work is uncertain and the conditions are harsh. You decide to try. The journey takes you beyond the familiar streets. The industrial landscape is changing rapidly. Fields that once stretched uninterrupted are being divided by embankments. Earth has been moved. Trees have been cut. Roads have been redirected. Bridges are rising. Ditches are being dug. And everywhere you look, men are working. These are railway navvies. The word comes from navigational canal workers because many of the techniques and labor traditions developed during the Great Canal Building era were carried into railway construction. The navvy has become a symbol of the enormous physical labor required to build the infrastructure of industrial Britain. You meet them near a cutting. The ground is soaked. Mud clings to your boots. A group of workers are using picks and shovels. Others move earth with barrows. There are no modern excavators waiting nearby. No hydraulic machinery is doing the difficult work for you. The earth must be removed by human effort, animal power, and whatever mechanical assistance is available. You pick up a shovel. Within minutes, your back begins to hurt. You keep working. The soil is heavy, wet, unforgiving. You load the barrow. Push. Empty it. Return. Fill it again. Push. Empty. Again. 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 The rhythm is strangely similar to the factory. Different environment. Same principle. Repetition. Production. Time. Output. The railway company wants the line completed. Every delay costs money. Every mile of track represents an enormous investment. The people funding the railway are thinking about markets, passengers, freight, connections, and future profits. You are thinking about your back. That is not an insult to either side. It is simply the difference between owning a project and physically building it. The railway cutting grows deeper. As you work, you see the scale of the task. A hill that has existed for thousands of years is being reshaped so that a train can pass through. It is an astonishing achievement. It is also exhausting, and sometimes deadly. One of the most dangerous tasks is working beneath unstable earth. The sides of a cutting can collapse. A tunnel can fail. Explosives can be mishandled. Heavy materials can fall. Workers can be struck by machinery or vehicles. There are countless opportunities for disaster. You begin to understand that industrial progress often requires ordinary people to perform extraordinarily dangerous physical tasks. A supervisor gives instructions. You follow them. The day continues. Rain becomes heavier. Mud reaches your ankles. Your hands develop blisters. You ignore them. Someone offers you a drink. You accept. The men around you are rough, loud, and experienced. Some have worked on canals. Some have traveled from different parts of Britain. Some have families. Some spend their earnings quickly. There are stories about drinking, fighting, gambling, and difficult living conditions among navvies, but the reality varied from place to place. What is undeniable is that the work demanded tremendous physical strength. A railway could transform a country, but the railway did not build itself. Thousands of bodies moved the earth. Thousands of hands laid materials. Thousands of workers risked injury. And many workers died. You continue digging. Then you hear something that makes everyone stop. A blast. The sound rolls across the cutting. For a moment, birds rise from the nearby trees. Dust spreads into the air. Explosives are increasingly important in railway construction because they allow workers to cut through difficult rock. But explosives are dangerous. A mistake in handling, timing, or placement can kill. You wait. Nobody speaks. Then workers begin moving again. The silence disappears. The work resumes. You realize something uncomfortable. Danger has become normal. That is perhaps the most important psychological transformati on of industrial labor. If every dangerous task felt terrifying every single time, people could not function. So the mind adapts. You learn not to think about the cliff edge. You learn not to stare at the moving machinery. You learn not to imagine what would happen if the tunnel collapsed. You simply do the job. Until one day something happens. And then everybody remembers the danger. The railway project continues for months. Your body changes. Your hands become harder. Your shoulders become stronger. Your back hurts more often. You become accustomed to eating outdoors. You become accustomed to mud. You become accustomed to sleeping poorly. The temporary camps or lodging arrangements around large construction projects can be rough. Workers need somewhere to sleep. Food must be provided or obtained. Water must be found. And when thousands of men gather around a major project, towns can change quickly. The railway brings money. It also brings disorder. Workers arrive. Businesses appear. Housing becomes crowded. Prices can rise. Alcohol consumption becomes a concern for reformers. Fights occur. Diseases spread. Again, industrialization creates two realities at once: opportunity and hardship. A shopkeeper may become wealthy because thousands of workers need food. A landlord may profit from renting rooms. A railway investor may make a fortune. A worker may earn more than he could in some rural jobs. But that same worker may spend his wages in a settlement where living costs are high and working conditions are dangerous. You continue working. One afternoon, the rain stops. For the first time in days, sunlight appears. You look up. The sky is enormous. You have spent so much time beneath factory ceilings and mine roofs that the open landscape feels almost strange. Then you see the railway line. The rails stretch across the earth. Straight, precise, impossible. You stand there for a moment. You understand why people are fascinated by the railway. It is not merely a machine. It changes distance. A journey that once took days can become hours. Goods that once traveled slowly by road or canal can move faster. Fresh food can reach markets more quickly. People can travel farther. News can move faster. Businesses can reach wider markets. Cities become more connected. The entire country begins to feel smaller. The railway is one of the clearest examples of the Industrial Revolution's promise. It genuinely improves life in many ways. But the workers who build it may still sleep in miserable conditions. That contradiction is everywhere. You finish your shift. As you walk back, you see a group of men standing beside the track. They are arguing. A worker has been dismissed. Someone says he complained about safety. Another says he was simply careless. Again, there are different versions. You have begun to notice a pattern. When a worker is injured, people often ask what the worker did wrong. When a machine fails, they ask whether someone maintained it. When wages fall, they ask whether the market forced the decision. When workers protest, they ask whether the workers are causing disorder. Industrial society is constantly trying to decide where responsibility belongs. And the answer has consequences. If an accident is simply bad luck, perhaps nothing needs to change. If the accident was caused by unsafe conditions, someone should change them. That argument will eventually become central to modern labor law. But the laws are still developing. You return to your room. Your hands are bleeding slightly from the day's work. You wash them. The water turns brown. You stare at it. The dirt seems endless. You wonder whether your body will remain healthy enough to do this for another year. Another 5 years. 10. You know older workers. Some move slowly. Some cough. Some have damaged backs. Some have lost fingers. Some can no longer work. What happens to them? There is no simple answer. The 19th century welfare system is still developing. Friendly societies, mutual aid, charity, family support, and other arrangements can help, but they are not universal solutions. An injured worker may depend heavily on relatives or savings. If neither exists, poverty can arrive quickly. You begin to understand that industrial work does not merely risk your life. It risks your future. A single injury can change everything. You think about this while eating. Your child asks about the railway. You tell them about the train. Their eyes become bright. They want to see it. You hesitate. Then you promise. Maybe tomorrow. That night, you realize that the child is fascinated by the machine. Perhaps this is what the Industrial Revolution looks like from the next generation. Not danger. Possibility. A train means travel. A factory means employment. A machine means invention. A railway station means a world larger than the village where grandparents were born. Children grow up surrounded by technology their ancestors never knew. Their expectations change. That may be the most powerful part of industrialization. Machines do not only change production, they change imagination. People begin to believe that the world can be redesigned. If a railway can cut through a mountain, perhaps almost anything is possible. If steam can move a train, perhaps machines can replace dozens of workers. If factories can produce thousands of identical products, perhaps goods can become affordable for ordinary people. But possibility has a darker side. If machines can replace workers, what happens to workers? You will soon find out. The railway project continues. One morning, you arrive to discover a new machine. It is designed to perform work that many men have been doing manually. You stare at it. The machine is impressive. It is also unsettling. The supervisor explains what it can do. Faster, more consistently, with fewer workers. The men become quiet. Nobody says anything, but everyone understands. The Industrial Revolution is not only creating new jobs, it is also destroying old ones. Traditional crafts are being reorganized. Skilled labor can be divided into simpler tasks. Machines can perform repetitive operations. A worker who once possessed a specialized skill may discover that the skill is no longer worth as much. This process is sometimes described as de-skilling. It does not happen everywhere in the same way. Some industrial technologies create new skilled occupations. Others reduce the importance of old skills. The balance changes over time. But from the perspective of an individual worker, the fear is immediate. If a machine can do your job, what happens to you? You watch the machine operating. You cannot deny that it works. That is what makes it frightening. It is not a useless invention. It is efficient. And efficiency is exactly what the industrial economy rewards. You look at your hands. They are strong. They are experienced. But the machine does not need experience in the same way. It only needs someone to operate it. You begin to understand why some workers attacked machines. They were not necessarily irrational. They were reacting to a threat to their livelihoods. But destroying machinery cannot stop technological change forever. The Industrial Revolution is too large. Too many investors want cheaper production. Too many consumers want cheaper goods. Too many businesses want higher output. Too many governments want economic growth. The machine will remain, and the worker will have to adapt. The question is whether the worker will be given enough time, education, and security to adapt. Often the answer is no. That evening, work is beginning. And now you must decide whether your family can afford to stay home. You sit beside the child for another moment. The cough comes again. This time it sounds deeper. You place your hand against the child's forehead. Warm. Not necessarily dangerously hot, but warmer than you would like. Your first instinct is to keep the child in bed. Your second instinct is to think about money. The two thoughts collide. You look toward the small pile of coins. There is not enough to make the decision comfortable. If you stay home, you may lose a day's wages. If you send the child to work, the illness could become worse. If you pay for medical attention, you may have less money for food. If you do nothing, perhaps the illness will disappear on its own. Perhaps. That word has governed working-class life for generations. Perhaps the cough will stop. Perhaps the fever will fall. Perhaps the employer will forgive the absence. Perhaps the landlord will wait. Perhaps tomorrow will be better. You decide to keep the child home. For now, you leave for work alone. The streets feel different. Yesterday, you barely noticed the people walking toward the factories. Today, you notice the children. There are more than you expected. Small figures moving beside adults. Some carry lunch containers. Some wear clothing that has clearly been repaired many times. Some walk quickly. Others look half asleep. You realize that you have been seeing them every morning without truly seeing them. Industrialization has made children part of the working landscape. Their labor is not always performed inside enormous factories. Some work in textile production, some in mines, some in workshops, some as domestic servants, some as messengers or street sellers. Some perform tasks in agriculture or small manufacturing. The exact nature of child labor changes from place to place and over time. But the underlying reason is remarkably consistent. A poor family needs income. A child can earn. Therefore, the child works. The argument sounds simple, but it hides a terrible question. How much of a childhood can a family afford? You enter the factory. The machinery is already moving. The supervisor notices that you are alone. He asks about the child. You explain. He looks at you for a moment. There is no sympathy in his expression. There may not even be cruelty. It is simply the expression of someone thinking about production. He tells you that the child is expected back when well enough. You nod. Then you return to your machine. The day begins. You work, but your mind is not entirely inside the factory. You think about the room, the cough, the fever. You imagine the child lying beneath the blanket. You wonder whether the condition is getting worse. Your hands continue moving. Your thoughts do not. That is another hidden cost of industrial labor. The factory may demand your body for 10 or 12 hours, but your mind can remain somewhere else. A sick child does not disappear because the bell rings. Neither does a dying parent. Neither does a debt. Neither does hunger. The machinery continues regardless. You make a mistake. The supervisor notices. He shouts. You apologize. The work resumes. At midday, you eat quickly. You consider going home. But you know what that means. Another absence. Another lost portion of wages. You stay. The afternoon seems longer than usual. Eventually, the bell signals the end of the shift. You leave immediately. You walk faster than normal. By the time you reach home, the sky is already darkening. The child is awake, still coughing. You sit down beside the bed. Someone has brought water. There is no doctor. Not yet. You ask whether the child has eaten. A small nod. You touch the forehead again. Still warm. You begin searching for information. A neighbor recommends a remedy. Someone else says to keep the room warm. Another person mentions a doctor who lives several streets away. You ask how much the visit costs. The answer is enough to make you hesitate. You count your money. Again, this is how poverty changes decision-making. A wealthy person can ask what treatment is best. A poor person may have to ask, what treatment can I afford? Those are not the same question. You finally decide to seek help. The doctor arrives later. He examines the child. He listens. He asks questions. He offers advice. But 19th century medicine has serious limitations. Doctors understand much more than earlier generations in some areas, yet modern germ theory is still developing during much of the century. Effective antibiotics do not exist. Many diagnostic tools of modern medicine are unavailable. Treatment for infectious disease is limited. The doctor cannot promise you anything. That may be the most frightening part. He tells you to keep the child warm. He recommends rest. He gives instructions. You listen carefully. Then he leaves. You sit in the darkness. The room is quiet except for breathing. You begin thinking about something larger than your own family. If one child becomes sick, perhaps it is bad luck. If dozens become sick, perhaps something else is happening. If an entire neighborhood becomes sick, then the problem is no longer simply personal. It is environmental. Industrial cities are beginning to discover this. Disease can spread through crowded housing. Contaminated water can infect entire communities. Poor drainage can leave streets filthy. Waste can accumulate. Air pollution can make breathing difficult. The connection between public health and urban infrastructure becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. But building proper sewers costs money. Supplying clean water costs money. Removing waste costs money. Improving housing costs money. And someone must decide who pays. The wealthy may live in cleaner districts. Working people often live closer to factories because rent is cheaper and walking distance matters. Industrial geography therefore creates a pattern. Factories attract workers. Workers need cheap housing. Cheap housing is built close together. Crowding increases. Sanitation struggles. Disease spreads. The same economic system that creates employment can create the conditions that threaten the health of the people doing the work. You look around your room. The walls are damp. The window is small. There is little fresh air. You begin wondering whether the room itself is making the child sick. That thought frightens you. But moving is not simple. Another room requires a deposit or rent. A better house may be farther from work. Farther from work means more travel. More travel means more time. More time means less rest. Every improvement has a cost. Every choice has a consequence. This is what poverty feels like. Not simply having little money. Having no harmless choices. You wake the next morning. The child is slightly better. The fever has fallen. You breathe out. Relief arrives so quickly that you almost laugh. Perhaps the worst has passed. You prepare to leave. But before you go, the child asks whether they can return to work soon. You freeze. The question hurts. The child is already thinking about wages. Already thinking about responsibility. Already understanding that illness is not just a physical problem. It is an economic problem. You tell the child to rest. Then you leave. Outside, the industrial town is already awake. The bell rings. Workers move. Carts roll. Smoke rises. The entire city appears to be working. That is one of the defining characteristics of industrial society. Work becomes visible everywhere. It is no longer hidden inside individual households or small workshops. The factory dominates the skyline. The mine dominates the community. The railway dominates the landscape. The clock dominates the day. You enter the factory. Today, something new has happened. A notice has been posted. Workers gather around it. You push through the crowd. The notice concerns working hours. There are changes coming. Some workers read it aloud. Others argue over what it means. The details matter. A few minutes added here. A shorter break there. A different shift arrangement. Perhaps a new system of fines. To someone outside the factory, these changes might appear trivial. To you, they are not. When your day is already extremely long, an extra hour is not an extra hour. It is less sleep, less time with family, less recovery, less life. This is why working hours become such an important political issue. The question is not merely how much you are paid. It is how much of your life you must sell to earn that payment. Workers begin demanding shorter hours. The movement for a 10-hour day becomes increasingly important in Britain during the 19th century, particularly among reformers and working-class activists. The Factory Acts begin placing restrictions on working hours for certain categories of workers, especially women and children. But progress is gradual, and adult male workers remain less protected for much of the period. You read the notice again. The factory owner claims the changes are necessary. Production must remain competitive. Orders must be completed. Costs must be controlled. You understand the argument. But you also understand the worker's argument. You have only one body. It needs sleep. It needs food. It needs recovery. If you spend nearly every waking hour working, what remains of your life? The question spreads through the workforce. People begin talking, not shouting, not yet, just talking. That is often how social movements begin. A conversation, a complaint, a shared experience. A realization that your private problem is not private at all. The worker beside you has the same complaint. The worker behind you has the same problem. Someone else has a worse one. You begin comparing wages, hours, fines, accidents, housing, food. The similarities are startling. You have been living individually inside a collective problem. And now you can see it. After work, a small group gathers at a public house. Others meet in a workshop. Some gather in private homes. People discuss reform. Some want better wages. Others want shorter hours. Some want political representation. Some want education. Some simply want enough money to survive. The goals are not identical, but the feeling is spreading. Workers are beginning to understand that their lives are connected. The Industrial Revolution has concentrated them. Now it is teaching them to organize. You attend one meeting. The room is crowded. Someone stands at the front and speaks about the future. He talks about parliament, about laws, about working people having a voice, about children needing education, about workers needing protection. You listen. The idea is strange. For most of your life, politics has seemed distant. Something done by wealthy men in distant buildings. Now someone is telling you that politics determines whether your child works 12 hours, whether factories are inspected, whether wages are protected, whether workers can organize, whether your neighborhood receives clean water. You begin to understand. Politics is not distant. It is inside your house. It is in the factory. It is in the mine. It is in the price of bread. It is in the length of the working day. You leave the meeting with your mind racing. But when you reach home, reality interrupts the dream. The child is coughing again. Not badly, but enough. You sit beside the bed. The political speech seems far away now. The immediate problem is your family. This is the tension that will define much of working class reform. People want structural change, but they also need immediate survival. They cannot wait 20 years for Parliament to improve conditions. They need food tonight. They need wages tomorrow. They need medicine now. And that is why industrial reform becomes such a long struggle. The people demanding change are often the people least able to afford the time required to achieve it. You go to sleep. The next day brings another shift. Then another. Weeks pass. The child recovers. But you notice something. The child has grown thinner. The experience has changed the family. You begin thinking differently about work. You watch the younger workers. You notice their tired faces. You notice how quickly they adapt to exhaustion. You remember your own first day. The noise. The machines. The fear. You wonder how many years a person can live like this. Then you notice the older workers. Their bodies answer the question. Some have bent backs. Some cough constant. Lie. Some walk slowly. Some have scars. Some are no longer employed. They have become warnings without speaking. The Industrial Revolution is producing wealth faster than many previous generations could imagine. But it is also producing a new class of people whose bodies carry the history of that wealth. And the longer you remain inside the system, the more clearly you see the connection. The cloth in the shop window, the coal in the furnace, the iron in the railway, the steam engine, the cheap manufactured goods. All of it depends on labor. Someone has to pay the physical price. Sometimes that price is paid in exhaustion. Sometimes in illness. sometimes an injury, sometimes in a shortened life, and sometimes the price is paid by children who should have been learning rather than working. One evening you walk past a school. You stop. Through the window, you can see children sitting at desks. For a moment, you imagine your own child there. Reading, writing, learning arithmetic, learning about the world. You think about the factory. The difference between the two rooms feels enormous. One room prepares a child for the future. The other consumes the child's present. You keep walking. The thought stays with you. Perhaps this is why education becomes such a powerful part of industrial reform. A child who can read can understand a contract. A worker who can write can communicate. A citizen who can understand politics can participate. Education becomes more than schooling. It becomes a form of power. And the industrial world is beginning to realize that power cannot remain entirely in the hands of employers and politicians. The workers are learning too. Slowly, painfully, through meetings, through newspapers, through strikes, through accidents, through illness, through the simple act of comparing their experiences. You reach home. The child is asleep. You sit quietly beside the bed. Tomorrow, the factory bell will ring. But something inside you has changed. You no longer think only about surviving tomorrow. You are beginning to think about what kind of world your child will inherit. And that question will soon take you beyond the factory floor. Because while workers are demanding reform, another transformation is taking place outside the industrial towns. Political ideas are spreading. Newspapers are reaching wider audiences. Workers are demanding representation. Crowds are gathering. Governments are becoming increasingly concerned about unrest. And in some places, the demand for political change will become so powerful that ordinary workers will risk imprisonment, poverty, and even violence to make themselves heard. The Industrial Revolution is creating not only factories and machines. It is creating citizens who are beginning to ask a dangerous question. If they are important enough to build the country's wealth, why are they not important enough to have a voice in deciding how that country is governed? You do not yet know how far that question will travel. But you are about to find out. Because the next battle will not be fought against a machine. It will be fought in the streets. It will be fought in the streets. The thought follows you home. You have spent years learning how to survive the factory, the mine, the railway, the crowded room, the sickness, and the uncertainty of wages. Now you are being asked to imagine something different. A political voice. At first, the idea seems almost absurd. You are a worker. You own no factory. You have no land worth mentioning. You have no inherited fortune. You are not accustomed to entering government buildings or speaking to powerful men. But then you remember the people you have met. The miners, the railway workers, the mill hands, the laborers, the shopkeepers, The families living 6 or 8 people in rooms that should have held half that number. You begin to understand that there are enormous numbers of people like you. And if all of you could somehow speak together, perhaps the sound would be impossible to ignore. That is the promise of political organization. It is also the source of fear. Because governments do not always welcome crowds demanding change. The 19th century is full of political movements, reform campaigns, demonstrations, petitions, strikes, and confrontations between ordinary people and authorities. In Britain, one of the most important working-class political movements was Chartism. The name came from the People's Charter of 1838, which demanded political reforms including broader male suffrage, secret ballots, payment for members of parliament, equal electoral districts, and other changes intended to make political representation more democratic. You do not understand all of the constitutional details at first. What you understand is simpler. The people who make the country's wealth want a greater say in how the country is governed. You hear about meetings. Large meetings. Thousands of people. You decide to attend one. The journey itself feels unusual. Workers are traveling from different areas. Some walk. Some arrive by carts. Some travel by railway where routes exist. Others come in groups. As you approach the meeting place, the crowd becomes larger. You have never seen so many working people gathered for one purpose. There are banners, speeches, arguments, songs, printed materials, people carrying petitions. The atmosphere is energetic but tense. Some faces are hopeful. Others are angry. Some are simply curious. You stand among them. A speaker begins. His voice rises above the crowd. He talks about representation, about fairness, about the rights of working people. The crowd responds. For a moment, you forget the factory. You forget the mine. You forget the room. You feel part of something much larger. That feeling is powerful, but it is also dangerous. A government that sees a large crowd may see citizens exercising political rights. It may also see the possibility of disorder. The memory of earlier unrest is still strong. Industrialization has created dense urban populations. Dense populations can organize quickly. A rumor can spread through a neighborhood in minutes. A strike can shut down a factory. A protest can draw thousands. Authorities therefore watch carefully. Police appear. You notice them at the edges of the crowd. Uniforms. Horses. Batons. The presence of authority changes the mood. Some people become quieter. Others become more defiant. You hear someone say that the police are there to intimidate people. Another person says they are simply keeping order. Again, there are two realities. The crowd believes it is demanding justice. The authorities believe they must prevent disorder. Neither side necessarily sees the other as reasonable. The speaker continues. You listened. The demands are not merely about money. They are about dignity. That word stays with you. Dignity. A worker can be poor and still demand respect. A person can have little property and still believe their voice matters. You begin to understand why political reform and labor reform are connected. If workers cannot influence laws, employers have enormous freedom. If workers can influence laws, regulations become possible. Working hours, factory inspection, child labor, education, public health, housing. All of these issues can eventually become political questions. But political change moves slowly. You return home after the meeting. The next morning, the factory bell rings. Nothing has changed. The machines are still there. Your wages are still the same. The room is still damp. The street is still crowded. The child still needs food. This is the frustrating part of reform. The future can be imagined long before it can be built. You continue working. Weeks pass. Then months. Petitions are circulated. Meetings continue. People argue about strategy. Some want peaceful political pressure. Others become more radical. Some lose faith. Others become more determined. You begin reading newspapers when you can. The world outside your neighborhood seems larger than before. You learn that industrial unrest is not unique to your town. Other cities have disputes. Other workers have grievances. Other countries are experiencing their own industrial transformations. The 19th century is becoming a century of mass politics. Printing technology helps spread information. Railways help people travel. Urbanization brings large populations together. Industrial workers can communicate across distances more easily than earlier generations. The same technologies that help businesses expand can also help workers organize. That is one of history's great ironies. The railway moves goods. It also moves ideas. The printing press spreads advertisements. It also spreads political arguments. Factories create disciplined workforces. Those same workers can become disciplined organizations. Industrial society builds its own opposition. Not because machines are evil, because concentrated economic power creates concentrated grievances. One evening, a worker brings news. A major demonstration is planned. People are going. You hesitate. Your family needs you. You cannot afford trouble. But something inside you insists on going. You attend. The crowd is enormous. You can barely see the front. People have come with hopes that differ in detail but overlap in spirit. They want a government that recognizes them. They want laws that reflect the lives of working people. They want a future where poverty does not automatically mean powerlessness. You look around. You see children, older workers, women, young men, skilled craftsmen, laborers. The crowd represents the industrial population itself. and then the authorities intervene. The exact response depends on the event and period, but 19th century Britain saw major demonstrations and confrontations where police and troops were sometimes deployed. The possibility of violence hangs over political gatherings. You feel the tension. People are told to disperse. Some refuse. Others begin moving. Someone shouts. Another person pushes forward. The crowd shifts. Suddenly, what seemed like a peaceful gathering becomes chaotic. You are pushed from behind. You stumble. Someone grabs your arm. You regain your balance. People are running. You do not know why. Then you hear the sound of horses. You turn. Mounted authorities are moving through the crowd. Panic spreads. You try to get away. You do not want to fight. You do not want to be arrested. You simply want to go home. But in a crowd, individual intentions can disappear. You are carried by movement. You see someone fall. Others step over him. A woman is shouting. A man is trying to pull his friend away. You move toward the edge. Finally, you escape into a side street. You stop. Your heart is pounding. You look back. The crowd is still moving. You realize that political struggle is not an abstract argument. It can become physical. People can be injured. People can be arrested. Lives can be disrupted. And if you are poor, the consequences can be devastating. An arrest can mean missing work. Missing work means lost wages. Lost wages mean less food. A fine means more debt. Prison means your family may lose your income entirely. So political participation carries a cost. That is why courage is not the same for everyone. A wealthy reformer can survive a political controversy more easily than a worker who lives from wage to wage. You return home late. Your family is waiting. They ask what happened. You explain. There is fear. They are proud too. But pride does not pay the rent. The next morning, you go to work. The supervisor says nothing. The factory continues. Perhaps he knows about the demonstration. Perhaps he does not care. Perhaps he cares very much. Either way, the machinery does not stop. You begin working. And as the hours pass, you think about the political meeting. You remember the crowd. You remember the speeches. You remember the sense that thousands of people were finally demanding to be seen. Then you look at the machine. You realize that there are two battles happening at once. One is political. The other is economic. The political battle asks who gets a voice. The economic battle asks who controls work. They overlap. If you win political representation but remain powerless at work, many problems remain. If you win better wages but have no political influence, reforms can be reversed. So workers begin building institutions, trade unions, friendly societies, cooperative organizations, political associations, newspapers, educational groups. These institutions help working people survive and organize. They are not always successful. They are not always united. But they create something new. A working-class public life. You begin attending meetings more often. You learn names. You learn arguments. You hear people disagree. Some believe employers and workers can cooperate. Others believe the entire economic system is unfair. Some want gradual reform. Others want radical change. Some are religious. Some are secular. Some care deeply about political rights. Others care mainly about wages. The movement is not one thing. It is many things. That complexity matters. History is often told as though millions of workers suddenly united behind one idea. Reality is messier. People have competing interests. Different industries face different conditions. Different regions have different traditions. Different generations want different things. And yet, despite all those differences, common problems create connections. Long hours, low wages, unsafe workplaces, child labor, poor housing, disease, lack of political representation. These issues appear again and again. You begin to understand why the 19th century is filled with reform movements. People are responding to the world industrialization has created. But while political pressure grows above ground, another transformation is taking place inside the factory. The machinery is becoming faster. Production is becoming more specialized. Managers are learning new ways to measure output. Workers are increasingly expected to maintain a particular pace. The factory is becoming more efficient. And efficiency brings a new kind of pressure. You are given a target. Produce this much. Finish this many pieces. Keep the machine running. Avoid interruptions. Do not waste material. Do not fall behind. The supervisor begins recording output. You notice workers watching the clock. The machine has become measurable. So has the worker. This is an important change. Your value is increasingly expressed through numbers. How much did you produce? How many hours did you work? How much did you earn? How much did the factory produce? How much was wasted? How many workers were absent? Industrial society is becoming a society of measurement. And once everything can be measured, it can be compared. Once it can be compared, it can be controlled. You begin feeling the pressure. A worker who produces less may be criticized. A worker who is slower may be dismissed. A worker who becomes sick may be replaced. The machine does not care about your personal circumstances. Production has become the priority. You think about the child at home. You think about the political meeting. You think about the mine. You think about the railway. Everywhere you look, the same system seems to be expanding. More machines. More production. More workers. More cities. More goods. More wealth. More pressure. And then one winter morning, the factory announces that orders have fallen. The supervisor gathers the workers. Everyone becomes silent. There will be changes. Some shifts will be reduced. Some workers will be dismissed. The word spreads through the room. Dismissed. You look at the workers around you. Nobody speaks. Everyone is calculating. Who will lose their job? Who will remain? How will the decision be made? You realize that all your political arguments have suddenly become painfully immediate. Because now the question is not only whether you have a voice, it is whether you will still have a wage. The factory owner has made his decision. A production must be reduced. And by the end of the day, a list of names will be posted. You return to your machine. For the first time in years, you are not afraid of the work. You are afraid of losing it. And as the hours crawl forward, you understand the cruelest truth of industrial life. The factory can survive without you. But can your family survive without the factory? The factory can survive without you. But can your family survive without the factory? You stand beside the machine and try not to think about the list. The machinery continues moving. That almost makes the situation worse. Everything looks normal. Belts turn. Spindles rotate. Workers bend over their tasks. Supervisors walk between the rows. The familiar sounds fill the building. Yet underneath all of it, fear has entered the room. Nobody knows whose name will appear. You try to concentrate. You tell yourself that you have experience. You have worked hard. You have rarely been absent. You have survived difficult shifts. You have done everything expected of you. But industrial employment does not always reward loyalty. When demand falls, an employer may have to reduce production. When production falls, fewer workers may be required. The machine does not care who has a family. The market does not know whose child is sick. A business can be forced to make decisions that are devastating to individual households. That is the cold logic of industrial economics. You work until the bell. Then everyone gathers. The list is posted. Workers rush toward it. You hesitate. For a few seconds you cannot move. Then you walk forward. Names cover the paper. You scan the list. Once. Twice. Your heart beats faster. Your name is not there. Relief comes immediately. Then you see the face of the man beside you. His name is there. He has 3 children. He has worked in the factory for years. He stares at the paper. Nobody knows what to say. He finally turns away. You follow him outside. He does not speak. You want to tell him that everything will be fine. But you know that would be a lie. Because you have seen what unemployment means. It means no wage. No wage means less food. Less food means debt. Debt means pressure. Pressure can become eviction. Eviction can become homelessness. And once a family begins falling, each step downward can make the next one easier. The man walks home. You continue working. For the rest of the day, you feel guilty. Not because you did anything wrong, because you kept your job. This is another strange feature of poverty. Sometimes another person's survival reminds you how close your own danger is. You know that next time it could be you. Economic downturns are not new, but industrialization changes their scale. When industries become large and interconnected, falling demand can affect many workers at once. A decline in one market can spread through manufacturers, transport, suppliers, shops, and households. The consequences can move through a city like a wave. One factory reduces production. Another follows. Workers lose wages. Shops lose customers. Landlords struggle to collect rent. Families reduce spending. Businesses sell less. More workers lose employment. The cycle continues. You begin seeing more unemployed men in the streets. Some stand near factory gates hoping for work. Others travel ill from town to town. A man asks whether your factory is hiring. You shake your head. He asks about another place. You do not know. He thanks you anyway. That evening you return home. Your family is relieved that you still have work. But nobody celebrates. The possibility of losing your income has become real. You begin saving whatever you can. A few coins. Then another. You hide them carefully. It is not enough to make you secure, but it is something. The next morning, another worker is dismissed. Then another. The factory becomes quieter. The machines still operate, but fewer workers remain. The pressure increases. Those who stay are expected to maintain production with fewer people. The workload rises. You are grateful for employment. You are also more exhausted. That contradiction becomes familiar. You are afraid of being dismissed. But the effort required to keep your job is becoming harder to sustain. You work faster. Your body hurts. You make mistakes. The supervisor warns you. You apologize. You work faster again. You begin to understand why industrial workers could become trapped in a cycle of exhaustion. The fear of unemployment encourages workers to accept greater pressure. Greater pressure produces exhaustion. Exhaustion increases mistakes and injuries. Injury or illness threatens employment. The threat of unemployment increases fear. And the cycle continues. At home, the family budget becomes tighter. You stop buying certain things. Meat becomes rare. Tea is carefully measured. Fuel is used sparingly. Clothing is repaired rather than replaced. Shoes are patched. Nothing is wasted. Your family becomes skilled at making a little money stretch. But there are limits. Food prices fluctuate. Rent does not care that your wages are low. The landlord still expects payment. If you cannot pay, you may be given a short period of grace. Or you may be forced to leave. For poor families, housing insecurity is a constant threat. You hear stories of families being evicted. Some move in with relatives. Some rent a single room. Some enter lodging houses. Some end up relying on charity. And for those with nowhere else to go, there is the workhouse. The very word creates discomfort. The British Poor Law system had existed for centuries, but the Poor Law Amendment Act of 1834 reorganized relief in England and Wales and placed greater emphasis on workhouses. The principle behind the new system was deliberately harsh. Outdoor relief for the able-bodied poor was restricted in many circumstances, while the workhouse was intended to provide assistance under conditions considered less desirable than ordinary employment. The philosophy was that poor relief should not become more attractive than working for wages. In practice, this meant that entering the workhouse could carry enormous stigma. You are not unemployed yet, but you begin wondering what would happen if you were. You have heard stories. Families separated. Strict routines. Plain food. Hard work. Institutional rules. The workhouse is supposed to provide shelter, but it is not home. That distinction matters. A poor person may be hungry, but still fiercely protective of independence. Entering a workhouse can feel like admitting that you have failed. Yet what does failure mean when there are no jobs? That question troubles many workers. You hear arguments about poverty. Some wealthy people claim the poor are responsible for their own condition. Others argue that low wages, unemployment, illness, and industrial conditions make poverty unavoidable for many. The debate becomes political, religious, moral, economic. Everyone has an opinion. The person without food has the least time to discuss it. You return to work. Your friend who was dismissed comes to see you. He asks whether you know of any vacancies. You do not. He asks whether you can lend him money. You look at your savings. There is enough for a little food. Not enough to support another family. You give him a few coins anyway. He thanks you. You both know it will not last. He leaves. You sit quietly. You think about how quickly circumstances can change. 1 week ago, he was a worker. Now he is searching for work. The difference is a piece of paper. A name on a list. A decision made in an office. This is the insecurity at the heart of wage labor. You can be useful today and unnecessary tomorrow. The factory does not hate you. It simply does not need you when production falls. And that may be more frightening than hatred, because there is nobody to argue with. You cannot persuade the market to care about your family. You cannot explain your child's needs to a machine. You cannot negotiate with falling demand. All you can do is look for another job. Your friend does exactly that. He walks through the industrial district every morning. He visits workshops, warehouses, construction sites, factories. He waits outside gates. Sometimes dozens of men are waiting. Sometimes hundreds. Only a few are hired. You hear stories of workers accepting lower wages because they have no alternative. Competition for employment grows. Employers can choose from more applicants. Workers' bargaining power weakens. The unemployed become a threat to those still employed. If you demand higher wages, someone else may be willing to work for less. This creates resentment. Workers begin blaming each other. But the deeper problem is structural. There are more people looking for work than jobs available at acceptable wages. The industrial city is full of people who need income. The factory is full of machines that can produce more with fewer workers. The contradiction becomes painfully obvious. Technology increases productivity. Productivity can reduce the amount of labor required for each unit of production. Yet the population still needs employment. This does not mean machines always cause unemployment. Industrialization also creates entirely new industries and occupations. But during periods of transition, specific groups can suffer badly. Traditional crafts decline. Some workers need new skills. Some communities lose old industries. Others grow rapidly. The process is uneven. You begin wondering whether your own skill will remain valuable. You know how to operate your machine. But what if a newer machine arrives? What if the factory replaces 10 workers with 5? What if another factory produces goods more cheaply? What if your employer closes? You cannot know. That uncertainty follows you home. At night you lie awake. The child is sleeping. The room is quiet. You listen to the breathing. You think about the future. You want to save enough money to protect the family. But saving is difficult when income barely covers expenses. You want your child educated. But school means time away from work. You want a better home. But rent is higher. You want safer employment. But safer jobs may pay less or require skills you do not have. Every dream has a price. You close your eyes. Tomorrow you will work again. For now, that is enough. Months pass. The economic situation slowly improves. Orders return. Some workers are rehired. Your friend finds temporary employment at a workshop. The crisis eases, but the memory remains. You have learned that employment is not guaranteed. That lesson changes the way you think about money. You begin keeping emergency coins hidden. You avoid unnecessary spending. You repair things yourself. You teach the children to waste nothing. And you notice something else. Your family has become more disciplined because poverty has forced it to become disciplined. This is one of the invisible skills of working-class life. Making do. A torn shirt becomes a repaired shirt. Old fabric becomes something useful. Leftover food becomes tomorrow's meal. A broken object is fixed rather than discarded. Nothing is thrown away unless it is completely useless. Industrial society may be producing cheap manufactured goods, but cheap does not mean free. For a poor family, even inexpensive objects represent labor. So they are used until they cannot be used anymore. You return to the factory. Production has increased again. The machines are running faster, The owner has invested in improvements. New equipment has arrived. Workers gather around it. The machine is more efficient than the old one. You watch carefully. You know what this means. Fewer workers may be needed. The supervisor assures everyone that production will expand. Perhaps that is true. But nobody asks how many workers will be required. You look at the machine. It moves with remarkable precision. Part of you is impressed. Another part is afraid. You remember your friend waiting outside factory gates. You remember the list of names. You remember how quickly a worker can become unnecessary. The Industrial Revolution has taught you to admire machines and fear them at the same time. And this fear will become even more intense as factories introduce more automation, larger production systems, and increasingly specialized machinery. But machines are not the only danger. The environment around you is changing too. The city is growing. More houses are being built. More people are arriving. More coal is being burned. More waste is being produced. More streets are becoming crowded. And the air itself seems to be getting heavier. You step outside after work. The sky has a gray-brown color. Smoke drifts between buildings. You breathe it in. You cough. Then you realize something. The factory does not end at the factory gate. Its smoke follows you home. Its coal powers your heating. Its products fill the shops. Its workers fill the streets. Its economic demands shape your family. The entire city has become an extension of industrial production. And tomorrow you will begin to understand what happens when an entire population is forced to breathe, eat, sleep, work, and live inside that system. Because the next danger will not be a single machine. It will be the city itself. A city growing faster than its drains, faster than its houses, faster than its water supply, and faster than anyone understands the diseases that are beginning to spread through its crowded streets. A city growing faster than its drains, faster than its houses, faster than its water supply, and faster than anyone understands the diseases that are beginning to spread through its crowded streets. You do not know it yet, but the greatest danger may already be surrounding you. You wake one morning to a strange silence. The factory bell has not yet rung. Outside, the street looks different. A cart is stopped near the corner. People are gathered around it. Someone is carrying a bucket. Another person is speaking quietly. You step outside. A neighbor tells you that several people on the street are sick. You ask how many. She does not know. That is how disease works in a crowded city. It does not arrive with a warning. It begins with one household, then another, then another. Soon everyone knows someone who is ill. The symptoms depend on the disease, but 19th century urban communities could face devastating outbreaks of cholera, typhus, smallpox, tuberculosis, and other infectious illnesses. Poor sanitation and contaminated water could turn a local problem into a community catastrophe. You remember the water. The same water used for drinking. The same streets carrying waste. The same neighborhoods where houses stand close together. You suddenly understand why reformers have been so concerned about drainage and sanitation. For years, these issues seemed like matters for landlords and municipal authorities. Now they feel like matters of life and death. You go to work anyway. The factory is quieter than usual. Several workers are absent. The supervisor is angry. He complains about lost production. But even he cannot ignore the sickness. A worker collapses. The machinery stops. People move away. Someone calls for help. You look around the factory. For once, nobody is thinking about production. Everyone is thinking about survival. The outbreak spreads. Within days, streets become quieter. Shops close early. Families keep children indoors. People avoid crowded places. Rumors spread faster than reliable information. Some blame the water. Some blame the air. Some blame foreigners. Some blame poverty. Some blame divine punishment. Medical understanding is still changing. The scientific explanation of infectious disease will become increasingly powerful as the 19th century progresses, especially with developments associated with figures such as John Snow and later Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch. But you are living before modern public health has fully developed. You do not know about bacteria the way a modern person does. You know only that people become sick, and sometimes they die. You watch a family carry a coffin, then another. The streets become frighteningly quiet. The industrial city that once seemed unstoppable has suddenly discovered that even its machines cannot defeat disease. Factories can produce cloth. Railways can cross mountains. Steam engines can move enormous loads. But none of these achievements can guarantee that the water you drink is safe. That realization changes the meaning of progress. A city can be technologically advanced and still be dangerously unhealthy. And so the pressure for reform grows. Public health becomes a political issue. Clean water, sewers, waste removal, street improvement, housing, factory inspection, medical knowledge. These are no longer abstract ideas. They are necessary for survival. You survive the outbreak. Not everyone does. When the sickness finally begins to weaken, the neighborhood feels different. Some houses are empty. Some families have lost relatives. Some workers have not returned. The factory starts again. The bell rings. People walk inside. The machines begin moving. You stand there for a moment before entering. You have changed. The factory looks exactly as it did before. But you no longer see only machinery. You see the people. The worker beside you. The woman carrying materials. The child who once worked here. The older man whose hands no longer close properly. The family waiting at home. The entire industrial world seems connected. The machine. The wage. The house. the water, the railway, the mine, the political meeting, the hospital, the graveyard. All of them belong to the same story. And that story is not simply one of suffering. Because slowly, things begin to change. Not everywhere. Not immediately. Not equally. But change comes. Factory legislation becomes stronger. Restrictions on child labor expand. Working hours for certain groups are reduced. Factory inspection develops. Trade unions gain greater legal recognition. Public health reforms improve sanitation in many towns. Railways become safer over time. Workplace expectations change. Education expands. Political representation becomes broader. The world you entered at the beginning of this journey is not the world that will exist at the end of the century. But progress has a strange quality. It often arrives after enormous suffering. The rules protecting workers are written after workers have already been injured. The sanitation systems are built after outbreaks have already killed thousands. The restrictions on child labor are introduced after generations of children have already spent their youth in workplaces. The political reforms arrive after crowds have already marched. The safety standards emerge after accidents. The improvements are real, but they are late. You think about that. You think about the child who once coughed in your small room. The child survived. More importantly, the child is older now. The world is changing. You want something different for the next generation. You want education. You want choices. You want the child to have a life that does not depend entirely on the factory bell. Perhaps the child will work in an office. Perhaps in a shop. Perhaps on a railway. Perhaps in a profession that does not yet exist. That possibility is one of the great gifts of industrialization. The future becomes harder to predict. New occupations appear. New technologies arrive. New industries grow. People can travel farther. Information moves faster. Goods become more widely available. Cities become centers of culture, politics, education, and commerce. Industrialization creates a modern world. But you now know what it cost to build it. You remember the mine, the darkness, the child beside the ventilation door. You remember the railway cutting, the mud, the explosives, the men pushing barrows. You remember the factory, the noise, the clock, the machinery. You remember the list of dismissed workers. You remember the political crowds, the speeches, the fear of police. You remember the sick neighborhood, the contaminated water, the coffins. You remember your own hands, the scars, the exhaustion, the days when you had just enough money, and the days when you had almost none. When people later speak proudly about the Industrial Revolution, you will understand why the story cannot be told from only one side. Yes, it transformed transportation. Yes, it transformed manufacturing. Yes, it increased productivity. Yes, it helped create enormous economic growth. Yes, it produced technologies that would eventually improve millions of lives. But none of those truths erase the suffering experienced by the people who lived through the transformation. The Industrial Revolution was not a machine arriving in an empty world. It was a transformation imposed upon human lives. People had to adapt. Families had to adapt. Cities had to adapt. Governments had to adapt. And eventually, laws had to adapt. That process was slow because society itself had to learn what industrialization meant. At first, many people treated factory injuries as unfortunate accidents. Then they began asking whether accidents could be prevented. At first, child labor was considered an economic necessity. Then reformers asked whether childhood should be protected. At first, filthy streets were treated as ordinary features of poor neighborhoods. Then public health officials demonstrated that sanitation could save lives. At first, workers were expected to accept whatever conditions employers offered. Then workers discovered the power of organization. At first, political participation was restricted. Then ordinary people demanded a greater voice. Every step required pressure. Every improvement had opponents. Every reform created arguments about cost. And every generation inherited unfinished problems. That is perhaps the most realistic way to understand the Industrial Revolution. It was not a single event. It was a long struggle. A struggle between old ways and new technologies. Between wealth and poverty. Between employers and workers. Between efficiency and safety. Between economic growth and human welfare. Between political authority and popular demands. And above all, between the enormous power of industrial systems and the ordinary human beings expected to live inside them. You walk through the town one final time. The streets are still crowded. Factories still smoke. Trains still roar. The mine still operates. People still hurry to work. But there are differences. A school has opened. A new sewer is being constructed. Factory inspectors visit workplaces. Working hours have changed for some workers. Children are increasingly expected to spend at least part of their lives in education rather than employment. The changes are imperfect. Poverty has not disappeared. Dangerous jobs still exist. Industrial pollution remains. Workers still struggle. But the direction has changed. People have learned that society can be changed. That may be the most important legacy of the entire period. The Industrial Revolution taught people that the world around them was not necessarily permanent. If machines could transform production, laws could transform workplaces. If railways could transform travel, education could transform opportunity. If cities could be rebuilt, perhaps communities could be rebuilt too. You stop beside the railway. A train passes. You watch it disappear. When you first saw one, you thought only about the machine. Now you think about everything behind it. The miners who produced the coal, the workers who built the railway, the engineers who designed the engines, the laborers who constructed bridges and tunnels, the families who lived beside the tracks, the passengers who now travel more quickly than their grandparents ever could. The railway is still a marvel, but now you see the human hands behind the marvel. That is what you have learned. Technology has no human story until people use it. And when people use it, someone pays the cost. Sometimes the cost is money, sometimes time, sometimes health, sometimes freedom, sometimes an entire childhood. The Industrial Revolution created a world that eventually made modern life possible. But it did not create that world gently. It demanded coal from the earth, labor from human bodies, time from families, risk from workers, and sacrifice from generations. You look toward the factory one last time. The bell rings. Workers enter. The machines begin. For a moment, the sound seems frightening. Then you realize something. The machine is not the final story. The people are. The workers who endured. The children who eventually left the factories. The reformers who demanded change. The organizers who built unions. The doctors who studied disease. The engineers who improved machines. The politicians who passed reforms. The families who survived. The ordinary people who woke before dawn, walked through polluted streets, entered dangerous workplaces, and somehow found enough strength to return home again. They are the reason the modern world exists. And if you had truly been born into the Industrial Revolution, you might not have survived it. Perhaps the mine would have taken you. Perhaps the factory would have injured you. Perhaps disease would have reached your home. Perhaps unemployment would have emptied your cupboard. Perhaps a railway accident would have ended your life. Perhaps your child would have been forced into work before learning to read. Perhaps poverty would have given you no safe choice at all. That is why the question is not simply whether you could work hard enough. You probably could. The question is whether your body, your family, your health, your wages, and your luck could survive a world changing faster than the people living inside it could understand. The Industrial Revolution gave humanity extraordinary power. But power without protection can become dangerous. The machines became faster. The factories became larger. The cities became bigger. The railways became longer. The markets became wider. And eventually, society began learning a lesson that remains relevant even now. Progress should not be measured only by what machines can produce. It should also be measured by how people are treated while producing it. A society is not truly advanced because it can build enormous factories. It is advanced when the people working inside them can return home safely. It is not truly prosperous because goods are cheap. It is prosperous when ordinary families can afford to live. It is not truly modern because trains move quickly. It is modern when the people maintaining those trains are protected. And it is not truly successful because a nation becomes wealthy. It is successful when that wealth gives ordinary people more security, more opportunity, more education, and more control over their own lives. You turn away from the railway. The evening is coming. The industrial skyline is still there. Smoke rises above the rooftops. But the world is no longer quite as dark as it was when you first arrived. The old world has disappeared. The new one has been built. And you finally understand what it demanded. Not just invention, not just capital, not just machines. People, millions of them. People who worked before sunrise. People who descended underground. People who crossed muddy construction sites. People who stood beside roaring machinery. People who lost jobs. People who organized. People who marched. People who became sick. People who demanded reform. People who died. And people who survived long enough to make the next generation's life a little better. That is the Industrial Revolution. Not merely the story of steam and steel. It is the story of ordinary human beings trying to remain human while the entire world around them was being rebuilt. And if you had lived through it, perhaps the greatest achievement would not have been becoming rich. It would simply have been making it home at the end of another day. The factory bell rings once more. Workers disappear through the doors. The machines begin their endless rhythm. But now somewhere beyond the noise, there is a school bell too. Children are entering classrooms. And for the first time in generations, some of them will have a chance to inherit the industrial world without having to sacrifice their childhood to build it. You walk home. The streets are still imperfect. The air is still heavy. The future is still uncertain. But tomorrow will come. And this time, you know that history does not move only because machines move. It moves because people decide that the world they inherited does not have to be the world they leave behind. If you want to continue the journey, the next video is waiting.